Good morning, internet friends, YouTube family, Chatlandia. This is Robert Phoenix, live, broadcasting from Fredericksburg, the spiritual detective with the inner directive. And today we're going to get into some very interesting material. Your sleuth for eternal truth. That's me as well. And we're here on a daily basis trying to untangle the knotty yarn ball of reality. And today we're going to take another stab at it. And you can see from the title of today's show that a fellow by the name of Steve Pachinik is going to play a role in it. Good morning, Jennifer Fitzgerald. There she is. Lindsay, CG, what's happening? Nice to see you both. Sandra Wells, what's going on, cuz? Good to see you. There's TFT. Double M. Paul Nitton, my man. St. Paul. What's going on, Paul? Good to see you. Tamara Garth. Hello, Tamara. Lils is here. Uncle Glenn. Ryan. Thanks for sending me that link, Ryan. That was really a cool piece, cool video on James Hubble. The thing that blew me away about that video was how he responded to his house being burned down. That was a kind of amazing video in that regard. And I was in those fires, by the way, in San Diego. We got, who else do we have? FUP77 is here. Danica Rose, what's going on, DR? Earthling here. Hello, Earthling. Light Sage. Morning. There's Teresa Blackburn. Hi, Teresa. Laura D. The Creamies. The Creamies are here. Judy Anderson. Hello, Judy. Looking forward to seeing all three of you. Justice Moody. There he is. Maurice Demer. Leanne. Hi, Leanne. How are you doing? Nice to see you here. Your hair looks strawberry blonde. It's the light. It's the lighting here. I've got a different light that I'm using, so it's highlighting what the remnants of my hair is. Mr. Robert, you do people great in your life of love and truth. Thanks. You're welcome, Monkey Butt Toenail. What's going on, Evan? Nice to see you. Miranda Couch, the Universal Couch Surfer. There is Jonas. Good morning, Jonas. We're starting to hit a little bit of critical mass here, which is good. But yeah. The Hubble introspective woodworker sent me a great PBS documentary on James Hubble, who is an artist and does a lot of different things. Sculpting, carving, painting, drawing. Created kind of a Xanadu for his place in San Diego, which got burned down by the fire that I was actually in San Diego to kind of witness and be a part of. You emanate light. Well, yeah. Well, thank you. You're laughing. You're so laughing. Let's see. Pennsylvania federal judge ruled the lockdowns unconstitutional. Yeah, I saw that, and I truly hope that that they will follow the orders and open the state back up. Got a bit of an issue with Lancaster, apparently, but it's another controlled burn in some ways. Christy Tesmer, what's going on, Christy? Christy Tesmer. Good to see you. Looking forward to seeing you. We've got some great activities planned. Oh boy, great activities. I'm actually purchasing a sound system for the event. Total sound system. There he is, DJ MC. What's going on, Michael? Papa Mike. Daddy, Big Daddy. Arkansas legislators, including my dad, are suing the governor for the mask mandate. Good. Sue these fuckers. Yeah, I purchased a sound system, and I have great news. I have great news for you event goers. The musical side of things is going to be off the charts. We're going to have Hope Easton there. Hi, Wendy. I hope you got the link for the webinar okay. There's Leon Luis from the other side of the world. Nice to see you, Leon. Hope Easton, and guess who else is coming to the event? Lee Guest is going to be at the event, and she'll be performing live at our Hill Country Hoedown out at the Blue Moon Ranch. So Lee had a viral internet hit called Fuck Your Feelings. And it has to do with, people who take their feelings a little more seriously than the rest of us. And she's working on a video for that now. And as soon as she's done with the video, I'm going to bring her onto the show, and we're going to talk about the video, and it'll be good. What's going on, Frank? Good to see you. Good morning. POUR, Poor Choices. So when she gets that video, I'm telling you right now, when she puts that thing on YouTube, she's going to get millions of views. Millions of views. People, and she's going to get a lot of dislikes too. She's basically burned the bridges. She's burned that bridge. She has burned that bridge. She is not going back. There's walk away, and then there's taking nitroglycerin and dynamite and completely obliterating the bridge into smithereens. Hi, Anna. Nice to see you. Anna Shaban in the house. Yes, we are going to get into the complicated world of Mr. Steve Pieczenik and try to understand why he matters during a time like this. So Lee Guest is coming. I'm very psyched about that. So we're going to have so much music. We're going to have Hope Easton, Masaki, aka Akaida, Lee Guest, So if you have been jonesing for live entertainment, which you've not been able to really have, we'll have it. If you've been jonesing for being able to move freely without a mask, you'll be able to do it. If you've been jonesing for connecting with people who have, let's say, alternative points of view, we'll be here. Okay. So the deadline for the rooms, that's over. That's done. There is still places that you can stay in and around the hotel that we're at. They're actually slightly more affordable, but do not have the amenities of the place that we'll all be staying at. And if you absolutely need to be here, got to be here, want to be here, send me an email, and I'll give you to Friday. Because this is going to be such a cool event. Such a cool event. You don't want to miss out. And I know I got it going a little bit late. Had I done it 6 months ago, I would have over 100 people. But it is what it is. And whoever's going to be there is going to be there. And just trust me on this. You're going to have a self-contained experience where we're going to travel back before 3/11, which is when all this went down, right? All this went down. Let's see. What do we have here? There's Claire Guest. Claire is the mother of Lee and proud mother of Lee. You did well. You and Steve did very well with that young woman. Lots to be proud of. There's Diana. Hi, Diana. Good to see you. Zane Ivy, 2 weeks quarantine when hitting the U.S. and 2 weeks quarantine returning to Korea. Who says you have to return to Korea? No, I'm just messing around with you. But the 2 weeks quarantine in the U.S., that's brutal. I know we live in a time where it is going to be even more difficult to travel. Trust me on this. Trust me. So why don't we get into some stuff here today? Let's just jump right in and we'll do our little invocation. Oh, dear blessed and holy Father, Mother God of the great central sun, within the universe, a light, which is the light of Yeshua, Sananda, Emmanuel, we ask that only the highest and best information, wisdom, and truth come through this channel at this particular time, and through the grace and love of the universal expression, which we all share, we humbly embrace the qualities of fortitude and commitment, flexibility, endurance, intelligence, humor, strength, courage, higher mind, higher will, purpose, guidance, direction, clarity, compassion, empathy, discernment, and above all, love. If there is any karmic residue that we share, may it be cleansed, purified, removed, so that we can return to our states sovereign as we were. Let's get rocking. John G., good to see you. Nice to see you. Welcome to the show. So here's the question. What is really going on? What is really going on? And I've been circling the target for the last week, right? I've been circling the target. And when I went back in time and looked at the Patty Hearst incident, because it grabbed me. It was like, why am I focusing on what happened with Patty Hearst? And the reason that I've been able to derive was that I hope that I proved that the Patty Hearst incident was a psychological operation that was being run by a contractor of an alphabet agency who was employed by that alphabet agency in Southeast Asia. And that is a fact and on the record. Colston Weston is the person I'm talking about. He was involved in the Phoenix Project, okay? The Phoenix Project. And when you're in and you speak 10 languages, you don't leave. You do not leave. You are a valuable asset. Number one, you know too much. You know too much. It's like the TV show The Prisoner, which is an amazing series, by the way. If you have not watched The Prisoner all the way through, I own the box set. It is a mind-blowing TV series. And Patrick McGoohan plays coy with it. But he knows what's going on. He knew what was going on. And he was working with people from MI5/MI6 at that time. I'm convinced of that. The other series that was taking place, there were 3 series. There was The Prisoner, The Avengers, which is another MI5, MI6 series. By the way, Diana Rigg just passed away, about spies and spycraft. And if you go back and watch the Avengers series, and there are a number of different incarnations. There's one pre-Diana Rigg, and then post the Diana Rigg era with Patrick McNee, who I believe is a cousin of Patrick McGoohan. So you have the 2 Patricks, right, in these 2 series. And The Prisoner is unusual in that it's actually shot in color. The Avengers was shot in black and white, which is, and they could have shot it in color, but The Prisoner was, and that was Patrick McGoohan's idea, and it was an offshoot of Secret Agent Man. And Secret Agent Man was a series about him being a spy. There was a time, the early 60s was high spy time in movies and TV shows. It was very, very, very popular, extremely popular. Neptune and Scorpio, right? Spycraft. You had James Bond, Man from U.N.C.L.E. The other series that came through British television at that time was The Saint, played by Roger Moore, who would eventually become James Bond 007. And interestingly enough, his name in the series is Simon Templar, right? So those 3 shows, there is a lot of show and tell with those 3 shows. They're very, very interesting. So if you want to go back in time and look at, how that stuff was created and then brought to the U.S., it's very interesting. And The Prisoner is kind of the model. It's the model for sort of where we're headed. It is the surveillance state. It is the village or the city or the small town as a surveillance state. And everybody has a number. Nobody has a name. Everybody has a number. And there's again, just so much show and tell in that TV series. And I believe that is the model of the future. And I'm going to talk about that today, that there's this decentralization that's taking place. And the decentralization is both astrological, and I've talked about this before, that when we had Saturn in Capricorn, which we still do, the Pluto conjunction, which is still there, and we have Jupiter and also the South Node, we've seen the deconstruction. So we have both at the same time this kind of massive overreach, and at the same time this decentralization process taking place. Anyway, so this all started when I was getting into this Patty Hearst thing and looking at this Colston Weston, and the Patrick McGowan reference is that he tried to resign from his position at MI6 and they would not let him. That essentially they abducted him and they put him in this island where they could do any number of controlled experiments on him and do their very best to get him to crack and spill the beans and spill information. So he is living in a panoptical, meaning he is being viewed at every single moment in time. And even the events that take place inside of the village are scripted, and in many cases just for his purpose, just for his triggering, right? And that in and of itself is a very interesting theme. And gaslighting is rampant through The Prisoner. So you get to see everything taking place. And again, that's the link, because Colston Weston just doesn't leave the CIA. He winds up working in Los Angeles, and he works for the LAPD as part of a special unit where he is working with essentially split personalities and using those split personalities to become informants. And the LAPD has a very interesting relationship with people like this. Freeway Ricky Ross, while not an informant, certainly at times was protected by the LAPD when he was essentially dealing drugs for the CIA in Los Angeles, right? This is what happens, So, and then you have the intelligence agencies and the backgrounds of course, the musicians that are part of the Laurel Canyon scene, and they're very prevalent. So these intelligence agencies are crawling all over LA. And so here we have Colston Weston, and he develops a relationship with Donald DeFreeze, aka Field Marshal Sin Q. He comes to the Bay. They both come to the Bay Area now. DeFreeze winds up going to Vacaville State Prison. Colston Weston gets a teaching position at UC Berkeley. That's a total setup. And the thing that he does is he starts to teach political science and has this outreach group called the BLA, not BLM, BLA, Black Liberation Association. And it is through that group that Patty Hearst is essentially recruited, and then through her relationship with Donald DeFreeze. And by the way, none of this is by accident. None of it is by accident. Essentially, she was handled. And she was handled first by Colston Weston, who is the professor, number one. Number two, the arrangement to meet with Donald DeFreeze. There could have been any number of prisoners inside of the Vacaville State Prison that Patty Hearst could have had a relationship with and heard about their plight, absolved herself of her high-level white privilege. So that didn't happen, though. So she winds up connecting with Donald DeFreeze, who connects her with Willie Wolf on the outside, who had been on the inside. Now, there was a prison break inside of the Vacaville State Prison in which Donald DeFreeze was allowed to escape. Let's be clear about that. It is very difficult to break out of prison. Very, very difficult. You don't read a lot of stories about prison breaks. It was a bit easier maybe back in the 70s when this happened. But he was allowed, right? Now he's got this fugitive status. But because he's working with Colston Weston, he arranges this kind of fake breakout. And then they have the fake kidnapping with Patty Hearst because she knew these people. She answered the door. There's Willie Wolf at the door. She knew Willie Wolf. And it just so happened that Stephen Weed was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cue Dr. John, right? He got the shit beat out of him. And then they take her and they abduct her and they go through the programming. So why was I into this story? Because it is a thumbnail. It is a thumbnail and a snapshot of a psychological operation. And everything that's done is gleaned from that perspective. The data is crunched and is processed and moved forward. And that's where we are now. We're in the midst of a multi-tiered, multi-dimensional, fourth generational warfare psychological operation. That's where we are. And if we can understand that, whether it's Jonestown, and I'm going to talk about Jonestown in relationship with Steve Pieczenik, whether it's Jonestown or whether it's the Symbionese Liberation Army or any number of so-called groups, even the Branch Davidians, because I think David Koresh was also an inside player. And the people inside of the compound, the Branch Davidian compound, I don't think they were inside players at all. I think that they were very convinced that David Koresh was going to be the great revelator of the seventh seal, which is what his reputation was. People came from all over the world to listen to David Koresh talk incessantly about the seventh seal, which is the unlocking of the Book of Secrets at the time of Revelation. They had underground tunnels in that compound, and they were moving kids in and out of that compound. And David Koresh was essentially breeding children inside of that compound. That's what he was doing. David Koresh was a master handler. That's who he was. He was a master handler. And it was all a very contained environment. And again, a psychological operation, and they were going to take it down. They were going to burn it down. And Freeman touched on this on Friday, that there is some evidence that David Koresh might have been able to get out with through one of the tunnels. Quite possibly, because he was an asset. David Koresh was selling guns. They had a license to sell guns, and he was selling guns to members of the Waco PD, the Waco Sheriff's Department, and they weren't ordinary guns. They weren't, your single bolt action hunting rifles. These were very high-powered, very specific kinds of military grade automatic or semi-automatic weapons. And that's what they had there. And that's what he was doing. And they decided that they were going to go in and burn the place down. And if you haven't seen the rules of engagement around Waco, essentially what happens is the ATF sends in a hit team. And the hit team is comprised of a leader and 5 guys who were Clinton's bodyguards in Arkansas. Okay, there's no mistake, right? They were there for a reason. So they go through this window. The first person that goes through is the guy who is leading the unit, the tactical unit. And as soon as he's in, he basically starts firing back at the guys who were going in the window with him. Now, he knew what sort of tactical gear they had on, which I don't believe was heavy. I don't believe they had heavy tactical gear. And even if they did, the tactical gear was probably only specced out to maybe take on, maybe a 357 Magnum round. It would not be able to take on a 308 round or a .556 round or 5.56 NATO round. It wouldn't do that. Those rounds would go right through them and right through any kind of protection. And I think maybe one guy lived. Anyway, that's where Waco goes off. The Clintons are able to get rid of 5 of their closest state troopers who knew all of Bill Clinton's secrets. They're wiped out. And then the siege happens on Waco. And again, we see the ATF, which is Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms. It is a federal unit, okay? Federal unit. And they were sent in, not a state unit. So remember, Trump can send anything in at any time. Anything. With any of these states. So Koresh is the compound is burned to the ground. All right. Operation. That was an operation. The Branch Davidians were in operation. And they're learning about mind control, group dynamics. They're always working. The people inside were not aware of the operation. They were there because David Koresh had this reputation of being this great biblical scholar. And again, as we go back into Mars retrograde and try to understand the nature of violence and aggression, David Koresh was being taught to be the leader of that community. And they're a spinoff of, I believe, the Seventh-day Adventists. And they were a spinoff group. And the woman who was teaching David Koresh had a son. And the son was supposed to be the guy that would take over and lead that community. And that did not happen. David Koresh and the son got into a massive argument, which resulted in a firefight between the two. And David Koresh killed her son. Okay. And he did not do any time for this. David Koresh was allowed to continue to run the compound. It was ruled that he killed the son in self-defense. A Abel Cain story there, right there for you, right? So the Branch Davidians and the Mount Carmel compound, 144, very interesting number, was baptized in blood. It was baptized in blood. So this is who David Koresh was. David Koresh also used to travel to, guess where? Los Angeles. And he would bring in a couple of very attractive women from the compound, and he would try to recruit guys from hair bands because he was into heavy metal. He was into hair metal. And he was trying to, create this, label, rock and roll, kind of Christian metal, fantasy there. So there were reports of him cruising around, the Sunset Strip, trying to get guys to come to Mount Carmel and jam with him and his band. But once they got there, they would sorely find out that they would not be allowed to have any sexual relations with any of the women there. That was for David Koresh. And he was breeding these kids. And I believe that this was an MK Ultra operation, and that they were getting the kids out through these tunnels. But then they decided to burn it down, right? They were going to burn it down. It was time for the operation to end, and they were going to use that operation to great success in a lot of ways, multi-tiered, right? So I'm trying to give you these to understand that these things don't happen in a vacuum. Okay, they don't happen in a vacuum. These people are created. These groups are created. These movements are created. In some instances, they have their own momentum, but they don't last very long. You know, there was a group in the 90s called the Freemen, and they were based out of Montana, and they wanted to create their own currency and do all this, you know, sort of maritime law stuff, you know, the natural law. And guess what happened? They say, fuck you. You're not doing this. Okay. You are not doing this. Ain't happening. Not going to happen. We could go to Oregon and talk about Rajneesh and talk about Rajneeshpuram outside of Antelope. He was basically run by Ma Anand Sheela, whose husband at one point in time had been connected to the World Bank. There were World Bank connections with Ma Sheela, right, who was a gangster. She was a total gangster. And they were, again, this is another operation. You know, they turned Rajneesh into an asset. And Rajneesh was a very interesting character. Rajneesh he really had something. I'm telling you, the guy had something. I've seen videos of Rajneesh when he was doing these darshans in Pune, where he's literally sending people into the next dimension. Just totally sending them there. And I've looked at his chart. He has a very profound chart. And during the time when he was at his height as a guru, he had a Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius with his sun. He had a grand fire trine in his chart. Very powerful grand fire trine in his chart. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Sun in Sag, Jupiter in Aries, and where was his Neptune? I think it might have been in, I'll have to go back. It might have been Leo. Anyway, he had that Neptune conjunction with his sun, right? And it lit up, man. He was totally lit up. And then what happens is that Neptune moves into Capricorn, goes into his 8th house, moves to the United States, loses all of his power, gives it all away to Ma Anand Sheela. And I do believe that there was a double involved with Rajneesh. And I told the story before where I was staying in a very strange weekend in Spokane, Washington. It was a very unusual weekend. It was actually Christmas. And I was living in the Pacific Northwest, and I really had nowhere to go for Christmas. So I decided to get my car and go drive to Montana. I never made it to Montana. I made it as far as Spokane, and I spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in a bed and breakfast in Spokane. And the owner of the bed and breakfast, sister, was from Antelope, Oregon. And I had a conversation with her. And the conversation was that they were videotaping and photographing everything about the community, because the community just come in and set up shop really, really quickly, very, very quickly. And then they started to get kind of intense. They wanted to start taking things over. But again, I think this is a limited hang, right? This is a psychological operation. And they were convinced, based on the forensics with the photographs and the video, that the version of Rajneesh that was there at the beginning was not there during the middle and the end. That they looked similar, but they were slightly different, right? So she thought that that he had a brother or a twin. She didn't consider the potential for cloning, which is kind of on the table. But the interesting thing about that time is that that's when Rajneesh goes into silence, right? He doesn't talk anymore. He just gets up there and does this shit, right? And everybody's going nuts. And Sheila's running the operation. And there is, about a 13-part or 14-part series that ran in the local Portland newspaper detailing everything they were doing. They were essentially just like the Branch Davidians. They were running guns. There was money laundering going on. But what happens? It's a limited hang, and they wind up burning everything down. Rajneesh can't go anywhere. No country will accept him. And within a few months, theoretically, he dies. And Manan Sheila now lives in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. So these are intelligence operations, right? But if you try to do something on your own, like like the Freemen, they'll shut your ass down. They will completely shut your ass down. So why is this important? Because when we look at BLM and we look at Antifa, they have the same blueprint, that these are intel operations. They're intel operations. And they are sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They are they're bipartisan operations. Let me show you a picture here. See if I can find this. Here it is. That one's a little on the heavy side. Little on the heavy side. And I do want to get into this a little bit. Where are we? Okay. So this shows you sort of the level of collusion and intel operations. All right. So let's start with Obama. And here we have, just get away. So I'm going to be bipartisan in my my scalpel here with my scalpel. So here we have Grady Johnson Page, and he is connected to the DC version of Antifa. And he's there. He's in the White House, but he's not alone. D. Ray McKesson was also in the White House on a number of occasions. And D. Ray McKesson has moved to a very high level inside of the BLM structure, and would not surprise me if D. Ray McKesson will run for public office at some point in time. So we can see here that this is, part of an intel operation that is essentially being run out of the White House. Okay. And here we have a mugshot of this fellow. And look what sign he is. Of course, he's a Gemini. Sorry, Gemini, I don't pick on you. I don't pick on you, Gemini. But these things are, how shall we say, quite evident in their revelatory sort of exposition. Right. So he goes here by Grady Jonathan Page. So again, he even has two names. Now, and I have shown this before when I looked at the Aspen Institute, which is a global think tank, okay? It is a global think tank based out of Aspen, Colorado. And a year before, where they had the Aspen Ideas Festival, Alicia Garza for Black Lives Matter was there. And a number of people from the state of Minnesota and, interestingly enough, I believe South Dakota, but mainly Minnesota, were there. They were there. They were brought in. And every year, Chick-fil-A has Chick-fil-A scholars that are brought in to the Aspen Institute. And these people, they're globalist communitarian globalists. And again, you will see that there are people also connected to the military industrial complex through the Aspen Institute. If I wanted to, I could go back through, say, the last 3 or 4 years and just look at who attended the Aspen Ideas Festival. You see this convergence of, people that are engaged in what we call new thought or kind of new age thinking, human potential in the military industrial complex, also corporations. They all converge, and they're all bedfellows. They're all bedfellows, and they all sleep together. So when we look at something like, BLM, which has received huge amounts of corporate money, and they're protected, totally protected, right? You can't touch it. You can't be critical of BLM. They've set the game up. So if you're critical of BLM, you're a racist, right? Antifa, which is, again, the twin pillars, right? We're dealing with black and white. BLM, theoretically more sort of black-centric. Antifa, again, theoretically more white-centric. It's a psychological operation. It is an esoteric operation. They are essentially, playing with Enochian magic, the black and the white, right? And BLM tends to be mostly female. It is run by essentially 3 women, and all 3 of whom I think are either gay or bi, and then DeRay McKesson, who is gay, all right? And then we have Antifa, which seems to be mostly male, although there's plenty of women in Antifa. But when we think of Antifa, we tend to think of being like more, more violent, more male. Man, they're both violent, but so again, we have this polarization, right? This polarization. So, Antifa is also, I believe, a limited op. And we began to see the rise of Antifa in 2016 when Trump was being elected, right? We saw these people go to these demonstrations and begin to get violent. That was the first time. And of course, they're going to catch, people fish in a barrel, the big dragnet at the ocean. But I believe that a number of those protests were definitely staged, and that there were operatives inside of those protests in order to polarize people and to move them more towards one phase or one sort of shade of the political spectrum. And there was one area where it was very, very evident, and it was California. And Trump had 2 rally points in California. One was in San Jose, and the other was in San Mateo Burlingame. And if you look at where San Jose is, and you look at where Burlingame is, it completely triangulates with Stanford. And Stanford, of course, being Langley West, the home of Google, the home of Stanford Research Institute, and any number of programs. By the way, Christine Blasey Ford, whoever she is or wherever she's gone, supposedly teaches at Stanford. Okay, so we have this triangulation with Stanford, and it would not be any stretch to think that some of these events were staged and run. Now, also, I had a friend who attended that Trump rally in Burlingame outside of Coyote Point, I believe at the Hyatt, and the cops were there, and the cops did nothing. Okay. He even asked one of the cops, "Aren't you going to do anything?" And they said no. Right. So there was already this precedent that the police were not going to get involved. It was the same thing in San Jose. They were not going to get involved. So this set a precedent, right? And then where do we see Antifa next really rear its head? In Berkeley. And what do? what do? They decide that they're going to bring Milo Yiannopoulos to Berkeley to speak. And who is Milo Yiannopoulos friends with? He's friends with Alex Jones. He's friend, and he became the cause celeb. Right now, here's your alt-right, sort of gay, radical, crazy truther, right? And so he has the bona fides. He's British. Apparently, according to him, he's also Jewish. He's gay. He's smart. And he's kind of model-esque. He's a Libra, so he's got that kind of Libran, kind of refined, ruled by Venus, body type, face type, right? And he's supposed to go to Berkeley and speak, and it doesn't happen. There's a woman who emerges by the name of Yvette Falarka, who is by any means necessary, and she leads this kind of hardcore protest against Milo Yiannopoulos, Ann Coulter, all these other people. And all of a sudden now Antifa shows up in Berkeley. Remember, I talked about this yesterday. Berkeley's right down the hill from DARPA. And who taught at Berkeley? Colston West. I think it's Wesley. Colston Wesley. He taught at Berkeley. Yvette Falarka teaches at Berkeley. So Berkeley is an incubator, and this is where we see the first scenes of this heavy conflict, right? And if I'm not mistaken, this is where sort of this early incarnation of the Proud Boys show up. And we knew about Antifa to some degree, but we didn't know about him really until 2016 and Berkeley. There's the school teacher who has the lock, right? And by the way, Berkeley is an incubator for radical leftist ideology. They have a school there called the Park Day School. There are 2 schools in Berkeley, private schools, that specialize in social justice and have been specializing in social justice for decades. And a lot of the curriculum that places like Park Day School are now going to be adopted in schools across America. Okay, so Park Day School is an incubator in and of itself. So is Berkeley High, which is right across it's very close to the campus, literally a stone's throw from the campus. So we don't see Antifa until 2016, when Trump hits the campaign trail, right? Did Antifa, show up at any other candidates' events? No, they didn't. And again, it's the presence. It is the presence of Antifa in where? In California. Now, there's a video that, and I want to talk about Alex Jones here pretty quickly. There's a video that Alex Jones did when he went to Seattle. And apparently, I don't know if it's his wife or his baby mama. I think her name is Kimberly Wolf or something like that. And essentially, she was a yoga Pilates instructor / escort, right? And that's who Alex eventually hooks up with. Her family's from Seattle. He went to Seattle, and there's this weird moment where he meets this guy on the streets of Seattle, and the guy throws his coffee, which I think is totally staged. I don't think it had hot coffee at all. I think it was totally staged. And Alex Jones is setting the stage for Seattle, right? He's setting the stage for Seattle being crazies, and Seattle being this kind of nest and den for Antifa. Now, what happens with these operations, obviously, when they started Jonestown, or when they started the Branch Davidians and David Koresh moving in, There are people that joined up and they didn't know they were part of the operation. They didn't know they were part of the Truman Show, which is what's happening now. You get a lot of useful idiots, and they get drafted and they get swept up and sucked in to the Truman Show. So when you see people that are part of BLM or the Antifans, know that they don't really know that they're a part of an operation, but they have been psychologically programmed in order to embrace that that methodology or that version of the operation. And again, all that was taking place in universities across America. And then the conditions where you shut things down, people have nothing to do, nowhere to go. What are they going to do? They're going to go out and take their frustrations, out on the environment. They're going to do that. That's exactly what they're going to do. And in many cases, they'll get paid for it. They get community. They get all these perks. So this is why they have been, in a lot of ways, indoctrinated and inculcated into the operation. They don't know they're part of an operation. And there are operatives inside of the operation. Trust me, there are. And these operatives, do they answer to Moscow or Communist China? Or do they answer to other people that are connected to intel agencies? I would bet that it's the latter, and look at who is still out on the streets. Nothing has ever happened to Peter Strzok. Nothing has ever happened to James Comey. Nothing has ever happened to John Brennan. None of them. Clapper, nothing's happened to Clapper. So who do you think are engaged in running these operations? There you go. And they have their other operatives, and they have been allowed to do this. They've totally been allowed to do this. Why? Because they're not behind bars. None of them have been tried for treason. None of them. Right? And I would also make leaps here that even if they're outside the system, they are still working inside the system. That they would have people in these various organizations and branches that they're working with, and they would get intel from. And so when we look at what's going on, it is a psychological operation. Now, do Alicia Garza and the unholy trinity of BLM know they're part of an operation? It's possible. It's possible. Do they need to know? Nope, they don't need to know. They could be convinced that everything is like a movie set, right? They can totally be convinced of that they have the channels, the back channels, they have the people that they trust, they have the protocols, all those things, which would make it seem quite legitimate. Whether it's, the Obama, Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice Camper, whatever, right? That's all they would need to know. And their ideology and their predisposition and their ability now to profit from this nicely would keep them from questioning, who they're actually working with or for. Okay. Now think about this. This is the other thing that I've been thinking about. Why have the mayors and the governors of these various states told their people to stand down? Well, this is a multi-tiered kind of reason. And I'm going to get into this. I'm going to make a leap to Stepachenik. So the reason why I believe that this has been the modus operandi is that, number one, they want to create a feeling of chaos and panic. Obviously, fear. That's important. Fear is very important. Number two, they are going after and targeting very, very specific cities. Very specific cities. And that's going to be part of the next piece. Number three, it is a major weapon of destabilization and decentralization, which I'm going to get into. And number 4, and this is one of the things that I think is probably one of the more important pieces, is that they do not want their assets getting injured and or arrested and or killed. And one of the reasons why they have had this kind of hardcore catch and release program is that they don't want their people to wind up getting processed and in jail and in the system. They don't want that. And I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to make a leap here that when we saw video of the feds picking people up in places like Portland or maybe Seattle, that what they were doing is they were literally kidnapping their own assets. That's what I think what was happening. They were kidnapping their own assets. They were kidnapping people inside of these groups, mostly Antifa, making it look like that they have been taken away by the bad guys in the unmarked cars. And really what they were doing is they were extracting them from the situation. And it's classic. It's a classic technique. They do it all the time. So the hands-off order serves a lot of purposes, but ultimately they want to protect their assets. They don't want people who are in the game to be killed, hurt, or in the system so that they cannot be reached, or if they have to be reached, they have to go through certain legal channels, and which will leave a paper trail. So the whole catch and release thing allows the recirculation of these people, whether their assets or not, to come back through the system. Okay? So this is why I believe that Antifa and BLM are intelligence operations at a high order. And if you go back and you look at the work of Anthony Sutton, who talks about Skull and Bones and how Skull and Bones works, that Skull and Bones will produce equal amounts of conservatives and progressives, rightists and leftists. And that is the sole goal and function of Skull and Bones, is to create people who are all part of the same operation, carrying out the same agenda, but having a right and left hand so that they can create a Hegelian dialectic. And Sutton's work around this is genius and groundbreaking. And if you have time, please get his books, watch his videos. They're important. And again, the classic case of Skull and Bones in action, John Kerry versus G.W. Bush, presidential election in the year 2004, where they were both Skull and Bones members. And it came out in the media. And John Kerry was there to basically take flak, run cover, so that when they threw the election, which they did. Now, remember, one of the guys that was instrumental in throwing that election is Karl Rove. And Karl Rove now has kind of moved back into that consultancy. And I believe he's working for Trump at this point. And Karl Rove is as dirty as David Axelrod on the left. Okay. So Karl Rove, and they rigged the voting machines, and it was John Kerry's mission to walk away and not contest any of the vote. People were sick of Bush. By the time that whole election came around, they were sick of him. They had to throw the election. And John Kerry, who was trailing badly in the polls, came out of nowhere, just like Joe Biden came out of nowhere and became the candidate. And, he's not anybody that anyone can relate to at all. he came back from the Vietnam War, and he was essentially, he was captured. And they don't talk about this in the same way that they talk about with McCain, but that there is, he was probably, debriefed, programmed, whatever. He came back, and he was a very staunch anti-war persona. And that's where he got his Democratic credentials. He's skull and bones, and if he was captured in the war, I guarantee you that through any number of back channels, through skull and bones, nothing would have happened to John Kerry through his being captive. If anything, he might have been, given crash courses in, how to use psychological operations and propaganda. So that was his, mission. You come back, well, you were going to run and you were going to lose. That's it. So they controlled both sides of the narrative, both sides of the dialectic, and that was being displayed for all of us. It was an operation. It was a total operation. If they had a viable candidate outside of John Kerry, a Democratic candidate outside of John Kerry, Bush, and the elections were fair, Bush would have lost. People were disgusted with Bush by that point. But again, outside of Code Pink, nobody else really took Bush on. There was no real anti-war movement, right? No real anti-war movement. There was, what was her name? Benjamin from Code Pink, and then the other woman who would protest out in front of his place in Texas, right? But that was it. Nobody protested anything. And all these Democrats, people like Nancy Pelosi, everybody who was there and boots on the ground in Washington, D.C., they all voted for the war. I don't think Bernie Sanders did. I think Sanders might have been the one guy that didn't vote for the war. I think, what's her name? Barbara Lee from the East Bay didn't vote for the war. But they all voted for the war. They all voted for the war. They all voted for the Patriot Act. They checked that box. They all voted for it. They're complicit. They're totally complicit with the whole thing. Totally complicit. There's no pushback whatsoever. None. So Bush would have lost had there been a real Democratic candidate. But again, what do we have? We've got guys that come through skull and bones, and guess where they go into? They go into intel. They go into business. They go into politics, but they always have the intel piece. Okay, now there's a movie that everybody should watch. It's called The Good Shepherd, and I highly recommend it. It is with Matt Damon, and it is with it is actually directed by Robert De Niro, and he's on the credits. I find it hard to think that De Niro actually directed a movie because I don't think he's very bright. I think he has kind of the he's a Leo, and he's got that kind of Leo sense of self-importance and the charisma. I'm not sure he has the bona fides for being a director. I'd be very interested to see if he actually really directed that film. It's all about skull and bones. It's all about skull and bones. Watch it. So that brings us to, again, this sense of opposition that does not show up until the 2016 election. Is Antifa a sleeper cell just waiting for Donald Trump to show up? And then you also have this alt-right thing that begins to take place. And you have Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, all these other characters. Laura Loomer comes out of it. The list goes on and on and on. And Ben Shapiro and the alt-right morphs into the dark intellectual web. And so this is this response to the so-called alt-right. And if you go through everybody that's a part of the alt-right, they all share one thing in common, with the exception of Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan, and you can do the math on that. Okay. So in order to have something like Antifa sprout up, you have to have the alt-right. You have to have the Milo Yiannopoulos. You have to have the Ezra Levants. You have to have the Laura Loomers. You have to have the Alex Joneses. You have to have all the people that are associated with that world during that time for the other side, Antifa, who brands alt-right as being fascist, to exist. Okay. Now, that was going to happen pretty much anyway. People were pissed off and they were tapping into this zeitgeist. They had tried to create the Tea Party, which got taken over and astroturfed. Marco Rubio is a Tea Party candidate. Wrap your head around that. Okay. So they knew that there would be this unrest in the American public, and they needed to channel it. They needed to have these platforms, and they needed to have people, speakers, symbols, figures who would embody this Vox Populi. And there was Alex Jones. He was ready to go. He had the network already set up. You go north to Canada and you have the Rebel set up by Ezra Levant. You have Breitbart, and Breitbart being essentially run out of Israel. There's the famous picture of Andrew Breitbart and Bibi Netanyahu all sitting down at the same table. So the vehicles were already set up for this. They were already in place. Andrew Breitbart had been the sort of the Pied Piper, right? The Pied Piper of this sort of movement. Andrew Breitbart, an Aquarian, by the way. And I'm even wondering now if Andrew Breitbart is really, really dead. I'm curious about that. I'm very curious. Says he died of a heart attack. I'm curious. Andrew Breitbart's history is unusual. He was adopted. And he was adopted by a wealthy Jewish family in Brentwood in Los Angeles. He went to all the great private schools. He was involved with people who were very wealthy, many of whom were involved in the media, the sons and daughters of people placed in the media. And he chooses a very interesting school to go to. He does not attend USC. He does not attend UCLA. He doesn't attend any Ivy League school. He attends Tulane. He goes to Tulane, and he is shown that there's this thing going on inside of American universities, which does not allow freedom of thought. So he gets into hot water in Tulane, and he winds up dropping out of Tulane, and this is his platform. And you don't start a publication like Breitbart unless you got people backing you, right? Whether it's the Mercers or whomever, or whether it's Bibi and Bibi's friends. Like, he is connected. And Andrew Breitbart was a very compelling speaker. And if you go back and watch a lot of his videos, they're very good. And I'm not here to invalidate a lot of the things that he says. You'll learn a lot if you watch Andrew Breitbart's videos. You'll learn a great deal. But Breitbart gets started. It becomes sort of this platform. It becomes a platform. There's another platform, which is WND, World News Daily, or which is what's his name? Joe Farah sets that up. And again, that's very pro-Israel, anti-Islam. So it's all these things are being set up at that time. They're putting the pieces in place so that when they have the election in 2016, they're ready to pounce on the populist movement. Steve Bannon gets moved into place. And I want to talk about Steve Bannon too today. So everything's being put into place. The Ben Shapiros, the Laura Loomers, the Alex Joneses, the Milo Yiannopoulos, the alt-right is being created before our very eyes. Because you have to have something to react against, right? And the alt-right gets very close to this idea of nationalism. which is a reaction towards globalism. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to honor your country, there's nothing wrong with that. But when we talk about nationalism, it evokes what? Images of Germany, right? Like, oh, the Germans were nationalists. They were nationalists. Oh, we're going to create another Germany. Well, guess what? Israel are nationalists too. They're total nationalists. But nobody's ever talking about Israel in regards to this, right? Israel is a Zionist state, and Zionism does not embrace any real religious or philosophical tenets, right? They're not wrapping their arms around the Torah. They're not wrapping their arms around the Hasidim. They're not. This is created by Theodore Herzl and is an outgrowth of a ideology that has nothing to do with the relationship with that version of the Abrahamic faith. Now, I do believe that there is a higher level connection with Zionism and Freemasonry and Enochian occultic magic. But that's not how Zionism is talked about. Okay, it's talked about in terms of this state, right? The state, it's nationalist. But it's never brought up in terms of, well, that's a version of nationalism. It's always about Germany. So once they got this ball rolling, now the invocation of the Aryan ghosts or the phantoms from another time. And remember, I looked at this idea of power and will. And again, I am not endorsing a model of Nazi Germany. I'm not endorsing anything related to this. So please be clear about that. Okay. But what I brought up was that this became a global symbol of too much power, too much will, right? The will to power. And when there's too much power, too much will to power, guess what happens? It ends in the Holocaust. And so there is this cultural governor, this historical governor. Meanwhile, Stalin rises to power and he kills everybody, and that's celebrated, right? So power can exist in a certain context. Mao does the same thing, right? Does the same thing. Power can exist within a certain context. And power, as they define the terms, exists in the communitarian version of power, right? That anything can go as long as the goals are achieved for the common purpose. And again, I'm not endorsing the other version, but these things, that's a massive, massive, massive ritual and psychological operation, right? So nationalism, ironically enough, arises out of that, and it goes to the nation state of Israel. But now we have this nationalism that occurs, and all of a sudden everybody's a Nazi. And who's there? It's Antifa, and they're ready to take it on, right? This is how the game works. Charlottesville is one of those moments. What do you have? You've got a guy like Richard Spencer, who is clearly an operative and out there, basically touting, the whole, anti-white narrative and blah, 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 blah. And he's a fucking phony. Richard Spencer's a phony. And he's the guy that sets that whole thing up, along with this guy who used to be a Democrat and Obamaite. And the whole thing is a total setup. Again, the cops are told to stand down. Who are they bringing in? They're bringing in operatives. They're bringing operatives in on both sides, the left and the right. That's what they're doing. So they create Charlottesville, and they create this situation. And of course, Trump has to play the card. Well, the other side is pretty bad as well. The other side being the Antifans, and immediately, which by the way is a logical statement if you're looking at it from a logical perspective. And then immediately he's branded as being a sympathizer. which creates more of this divide. The whole thing was staged. Charlottesville was another psychological operation, and people got caught up in it. You have well-meaning people at times, people who have been bullied, psychologically traumatized, and they see, this Antifa or BLM or whatever as being a way for them to have some form of collective and group power and be able to balance things out and settle the score and have personal and social justice. On the other side, you have people who feel like they've been pushed around. Maybe somebody has lost their job because a quota has been put in place, and, they're pissed off because of that. Maybe somebody has a wife who drank the feminist Kool-Aid and all of a sudden, did a hard left inside the marriage and basically split, took the kids and took everything, right? So there are aggrieved people. There are aggrieved people because we're always in a state of collective trauma, right? The trauma wheel is always turning, and it's turning now. Right now, as I speak, the trauma wheel is turning. And when the trauma wheel turns, people are broken, they're split, and they can move them around, man. They can move them around in any direction they want. And we have been living in a traumatized reality for quite a long time now. So what is really going on? What is really happening? Will we be dealing with the Bolshevik takeover of the U.S.? If they think that that's what needs to happen, it will happen. If they think that this is where it is going to need to go and people are going to willingly do it, they'll push that button and they'll rearrange the game and it'll happen, okay? It'll happen. That's if they think it needs to happen. And they can move this thing any way they want to, especially now when there is no unity. There's no unity at all. The only unity that exists is this unity party, that's being cultivated, by the way, for a very specific purpose and reason. But there is no unity. Everything's been fragmented, decentralized. So there's no unity, and people now are being split further and further and further, and more atomization and more atomization and more atomization and more fractalization. And now they can move people into even smaller groups if they want to. It's true. So they can move this thing any way they want. If they want to go full Bolshevik, if they want to go full on Fourth Industrial Revolution, hardcore surveillance state, Kamala Harris is president ultimately, maybe, she brings in Cory Booker underneath her. So you get the male-female thing going on. That's quite possible. Like, they could do that if they want to move it in that direction. I don't think they're going to do it, though. That's not what they're going to do. Because ultimately, Americans will reject that. What they want to do is they want to move people into a different model and a different system. But they want to incentivize them in order to do that. And that's where we're going to go now. Okay. So I want to talk about Steve Pieczenik and why I think Steve Pieczenik is an important person in this discussion. So first of all, who is Steve Pieczenik, right? Who is this guy? I'm going to bring up his Wikipedia page. And he has a fairly extensive Wikipedia page for a guy who's been involved in the intelligence game for a very long time. So let's just do the superficial, topical kind of, sort of scoop here. So the interesting thing about Pieczenik is that he was born in Havana. So this is pre-Castro Havana, 1943. His parents are from Russia and Poland, so obviously he's Jewish, and he was raised in France. So we can already see that Steve Pieczenik is an internationalist at birth. He's an internationalist at birth. What are his parents doing in Cuba? Why? How common was it to have, maybe it's more common than I think, but how common is it for a guy like Steve Pieczenik to be born of Polish and Russian parents, born in Cuba? Okay, maybe they left at that time, 1943, prior to 1943, we're deep into the Soviet Union. How do they get out? Then he's raised in France. His father was from Dombrovitz and studied and worked in Toulouse. They fled Poland before World War II. Here we go. His mother, a Russian Jew from Bialystok. Max Bialystok, the producer of the producers, the Mel Brooks movie, brilliant movie, Springtime for Hitler. So then they settled in the Harlem area of New York City. Now, you have to keep in mind that Harlem, when Steve Pieczenik there, it was not the same Harlem that wound up becoming known for deep poverty in the 1950s and 1960s, right? Although it was not as, say, prosperous as Park Avenue. So I don't believe they settled there, but I don't believe he was raised there. So Pieczenik claims in his autobiography to have received a full scholarship to Cornell at the age of 16, received a BA degree pre-medicine in psychology in 1964, and later received his MD from Cornell Medical University. So he attained his PhD in international relations from MIT while studying at Harvard Medical School. Pieczenik claims to be the first psychiatrist ever to receive a PhD focusing on international relations. While performing his psychiatry residency at Harvard, he was awarded the Harry E. Solomon Award for his paper titled The Hierarchy of Ego Defense Mechanisms in Foreign Policy and Decision-Making. Pieczenik's educational history has been disputed by journalists who claim that he falsely inflated or misled his credentials. That's interesting. So Pieczenik was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Henry Kissinger, Cyrus Vance, and James Baker. Now, this is important because Cyrus Vance's son is head of the Southern District Court of New York, who on some level has shown to be antagonistic towards the Trump administration. And in the latest demonstration of that antagonism, or basically arrested Steve Bannon, that guy Kolfage from the coffee company, and two other guys, one of whom was a current super head of the DEA inside the Trump administration. So Cy Vance pulled that trigger. His son pulled the trigger. Steve Pieczenik worked for his father. The Southern District of New York, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, has also been involved in the arraignment and the arrest of both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Keep that in mind. So in 1974, he's hired as a consultant for the prevention of terrorism. Pieczenik was made Deputy Secretary of State for Management. At the Department of State, he served as a specialist on hostage taking. He has been credited with devising successful negotiating strategies and tactics for several high-profile hostage situations, including the 1976 TWA Flight 355 hostage situation and the kidnapping of the son of the president of Cyprus. I believe that a lot of the terror events in the 70s were also psychological operations. Here's one. Pieczenik was often utilized as a press source for early information on the mental state of the hostages involved in the Iran hostage crisis. After they were freed, he worked side by side with Police Chief Maurice J. Cullinan in Washington, D.C. for the Hanafi siege. He was a special envoy for Jimmy Carter to assist in the search for Italy's Prime Minister Aldo Moro. So he is in the middle of everything, right? He's in the middle. Now he's at the Camp David Accords. He claims to have been present there. Not only that, but he also claims that he was instrumental in the so-called fall of the Soviet Union. Okay. So Pechenik has been the Where's Waldo. He has been the Zelig of just about everything. So as recently as 2012, he was a member of the CFR. He no longer appears to be a member of the CFR. It doesn't matter. He's consulted with the United States Institute of Peace, the RAND Corporation. Steve Pieczenik is military intelligence. Okay. He began the mentorship of Drew Paul, founder of Blabor.com. Blabor.com is now the production company responsible for Pieczenik's web and media releases. He's lectured at the National Defense University. This guy he's intelligence. He's military intelligence is what he is. He's written as a kind of a ghostwriter for Tom Clancy. He's done a lot of co-credits on Clancy's novels. He's written under the name of Alexander Court, Active Measures, Active Pursuit. He's published at least 2 articles for American Intelligence Journal. In September 2010, John Neustadt was recognized by Elsevier as being one of the top 10 cited authors. 2007, 2008. His article, Mitochondrial Dysfunction and Molecular Pathways of Disease. The article was co-authored by Pieczenik. So we get into the Alex Jones stuff. Pieczenik made several appearances on InfoWars, the flagship radio program, conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, when he promoted his conspiracy theories. Pieczenik repeatedly claimed Sandy Hook Elementary was a false flag operation. And he said that the September 11 attacks were conducted by CIA agents. So why wasn't Steve Pieczenik sued? If that's true, why wasn't Steve Pieczenik sued by the parents of the Sandy Hook kids? He wasn't. Alex was. So Steve Pieczenik was essentially handling Alex around Sandy Hook. Now, it says here that there are anti-Semitic tropes. One of the things that Steve Pieczenik has said was that Israel was involved in 9/11. However, he's recently changed that, especially as recently as last week. Okay. So Pieczenik is a player. And I want to play you some audio here, video, that clearly will show you kind of what he is about. Okay, this is an important, the statement here is very important. So I want you to listen to this. This is from InfoWars. And this was as recently as, if I'm not mistaken, the 5th of September. So listen to what Pieczenik has to say.
We are right now. Is there an attempt to overthrow Trump? There is. Will it succeed? No. Because the body politic of America understands very well. I told you where the power centers are. The South, Southwest, the Midwest. We would know that you and I know. It's
okay. This is important. This is important. Listen to what he has to say here.
Attempt to overthrow Trump? There is. Will it succeed? No. Because the body politic of America understands very well. I told you where the power centers are. The South, Southwest, the Midwest. He's
basically saying that the coasts are no longer they're no longer not just viable, but they're immaterial in some ways. Right? So he's essentially saying, there's no power in New York. There's no power on the East Coast. He doesn't mention Florida, by the way, he says the South, and I believe in that regards, Florida would qualify as the South. That's a whole different kettle of fish. Clearly, he's not talking about California or Oregon or Washington. And what he's saying is that this will be now sort of the bulk of the power corridor of the United States. Now, keep in mind, we have seen over just the last year the relocation of Del Bigtree, Joe Rogan, Glenn Beck, Elon Musk. Those are just 4 people off the top of my head that have moved to Texas, and 3 out of those 4 have moved to Austin. Remember that. Where are Walmart's headquarters located? In Benton, Arkansas, the sort of southeast. So Pieczenik is telling you that this is where the new America is. I'll keep going.
We would not tolerate any attempt by the Democrats or the major cities to take over the power. What you see is the eventual death of bureaucracy, Pelosi, Fauci.
So you're saying their attempt to hijack us and hold us hostage, you believe is going to blow up in their face and bring them down?
Self-destructive, Alex. I said it 6 months ago. Now Trump understands we have to move fast. Let me explain something to you. America is fundamentally a republic based on American values that you and I know. It's the Second Amendment. It's the First Amendment.
And aren't you saying we have to end the Democratic Party and create a new second party? The Democratic Party is a criminal, anti-American, just cesspit. I don't see how that party has to be gotten rid of.
You want to know, you don't have to do it. It's like having a cesspool and you just let the cesspool fester there.
So that's a very interesting statement. You let the cesspool fester, and that's what they're doing. They're letting the cesspool fester, but it's happening at a great cost. A great cost. It is one of the most cynical statements I've heard, because there are people in Portland, there are people in Oregon who have lost their lives. They have lost their families. They have lost their property. They have lost their businesses. Cities across America have lost family businesses. And you just let it fester and it will die of some form of toxic shock or toxemia. Is this really the strategy? Is this what's being employed? If Steve Pieczenik is behind this, I'd say the answer is yes. Absolutely. Again, this gets into the fact that if Trump wanted to, he could send troops in anytime. He could deputize and federalize troops at any time. And somebody would say, well, that's bad optics. No, but he did that, then he'd be buying into this idea of the left and him being a fascist. He's going to be a fascist anyway. He's going to be a fascist anyway. He's still a fascist, even if he doesn't send in troops. Really, what you would want to do is control the narrative. You'd want to control the narrative. And the narrative is that I am going to be tough. I'm going to shut this shit down, and I'm going to make sure every single American is safe. He could have done that, but he's not doing it. And the reason why is because they are participating in a process of decentralization. Trump basically said, I'm going to let the states do what they need to do. And it started with the coronavirus. And it bled over and into how they were dealing with the violence and the looting and the rioting. And so now we're seeing and even though Pieczenik is talking about the qualities of the republic, he doesn't want a republic. He even said so. And I've been trying to find the video. And this is when Steve Bannon got arrested. And he had Steve Pieczenik on there. And all they did was badmouth Steve Bannon. And I still stand firm in the fact that Steve Bannon is one of the people that, even though I would not trust Steve Bannon, I would trust him more than Alex Jones. I would trust him more than Steve Pieczenik. And by the way, Bannon and Pieczenik are both Sagittarians, which is interesting. I trust Bannon over Pieczenik, and they're both Steves. Is that interesting? Two Steves, both Sagittarians. Now we got more Gemini. Because Bannon doesn't like Jared Kushner, and he got kicked out of the White House. He got kicked out of the White House. And if Steve Pieczenik is bad-mouthing Steve Bannon, if Roger Stone is bad-mouthing Steve Bannon, if Alex Jones is bad-mouthing Steve Bannon, I don't think it's to create a new level of false opposition. I think they're bad-mouthing him because Steve Bannon is a Sagittarius, and he does touch on the truth. He will bring it up. And I don't think they want Steve Bannon fucking around with China. I don't think they want it. I think they want to handle the China narrative on their own. They have a plan in place, whether it's with Xi or without Xi. Steve Bannon is running interference with their plan. And the other thing, it has to do with the wall. And he partnered with Kolfage. And they got money to build a wall. And Trump didn't like that. He didn't like it. He felt he was being showed up by Bannon. And it was like, okay, we're a citizens group and we're going to take this into our own hands. They didn't like that. And that in and of itself is sending a message. Like, you do that. And by the way, you know, what did they kept $100,000 a piece from the GoFundMe. Big fucking deal. Big fucking deal. How much money was raised for fill in the blank, and how much did they keep? How much did they keep? How much was raised for St. Floyd? And how much did they keep? And how much did his handlers keep? I mean, please don't even get me started on GoFundMe and the ethics around GoFundMe. So they want they hit Steve Bannon hard. They hit him hard. And Alex doesn't like Steve Bannon at all. It's because Steve Bannon talks about things that Alex Jones won't talk about. So Pieczenik is a player, and we are dealing with somebody who has, according to his bio and according to Steve Pieczenik, essentially mastermind. Here, let me get rid of this. Essentially was the mastermind behind almost every single, important event of the 20th and 21st century. He is Henry Kissinger's right-hand man. That is his teacher. Henry Kissinger is Steve Pieczenik's mentor. And in that broadcast, I can't find it, he talks about being involved with Jonestown. He's involved in he's involved in an intel operation, which I talked about earlier on in the show. So what Pieczenik also said is he thinks that the Constitution is an outdated and outmoded piece of paper, and that we need to be able to update it and have it become more streamlined. That's what Pieczenik believes. That kind of gets into the unity party idea of where they want to take politics. Now, remember, the United States is going to have its Pluto return, which means that it will change. This country is going to change. And you're seeing these various groups vying for how that change is going to look and occur. That's what's happening. And Pieczenik is deep in the mix. And Alex asked him, well, we know Trump is good, and we know if he gets another term, but how do we keep this thing going? Oh, and Steve Pieczenik says, well, then we'll get Pence, and then we'll get President Kushner Ivanka. He's already mapping out the next 16 years. Don't worry about it. We'll have continuity. This is where Steve Pieczenik's head is headed. This is what he's crafting. So let's just I want to show you another thing. This goes back a ways, but I want to show you. This is clearly like the Alex Jones moment. And by the way, Alex Jones's set often looks like this place in The Prisoner where they're essentially orchestrating all these events, and especially this one with all the maps. Now, this is in 2017 and 2/22/17. So Trump has just been, he's just taken office. He's just taken his oath of office. And what you see here is Alex and Alex's angels. So we have Leanne, and then we have Millie. Here, you see, here we go. And Leanne is on her way out. Millie is on her way in. And then you have another operative here, Roger Stone. And then you're going to see, let me go back here. And it's really not important what they're talking about. It's really more important so now we've got the intel sandwich. We have Steve Pieczenik on one side, Roger Stone on the other side, and and Alex right in the center, right here. What do they call that? It's like when you would wrap a hot dog in a croissant and bake it. Whatever those things are called. That's what this is. And Alex is the weenie in the middle. And these two guys are the dough wrapped around the weenie in the middle. And none of these guys are trustworthy at all. None of them, including Jones. And I do think Alex is very, very bright. He's incredibly bright. He's incredibly well-read. He's a savant. He did not go to college, but he's got that ability to have recall like a savant. He can put things together. He's very good at establishing sort of this transhumanist dark AI dystopic world, which I think is a bit of a shadow. Because don't get me wrong, there will be an AI world, and we will have synthetic sentience, and we will have self-driving cars and all those things, but they will be given to us as technology upgrades, not things that will enslave us. Because when it comes, it will be, oh, wow, this is great. This is great. These things are actually working for us. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. Because we've been preloaded with this idea that the AI is going to be utterly evil. And it will be, but it will be benevolently evil. Right? It will imprison us in our own complacency and give us the one thing that the Antichrist counts on more than anything, and that's convenience. Convenience. And both of these guys are operators, deep state operators, both of them. All three of them are. So I just wanted to give you the optics here. There we have Leanne, Millie, there they are. She's going out. She's coming in. The brunette and the formerly brunette, now blonde Millie Weaver. And then everybody's favorite deep state operative, Roger Stone. Creepy guy. So I did a little chart thing for Steve Pieczenik. And let's just take a look at that very quickly. And then I got to get out of here. Where are we? I'm going to stop the share. Boom. Okay, let me look. So I'll show you the share here. Again, I took a whack at his chart. We know his birth date is December 7th, 1943. I've got Steve Pieczenik as a Capricorn rising. And with his sun in the 12th house. He feels like a 12th house sun guy. And all this 8th house material, right? The cloak and dagger shit. Libra on the ascendant. What was he supposed to be? A great negotiator, right? Great negotiator, great hostage negotiator. Moon down in the 4th house. Where do we always see Steve Pieczenik? In his home. And what do we always see? We see his wife, the moon, the mother, right? Hitting play, or record. And I just saw the video where he's doing this, and now I know Steve Pieczenik actually has arms. And look at all the Gemini here. Uranus and Gemini, Vesta Gemini, Mars Gemini, Saturn. This guy's got a lot of Gemini. You got a lot of Gemini going on. We know what Gemini is about, right? It's about more than one identity, right? More than one identity. He's been a co-writer, a ghostwriter. I'm surprised he even kept Pieczenik as his last name, to be perfectly honest. His south node is in Aquarius. Saturn's going to be hitting his south node. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be an interesting time for Mr. Pieczenik. And he's going to have a Saturn-Pluto opposition next year. That's going to be real interesting. Real interesting. If there is somebody who I think would be have a proclivity for a heart condition, it'd be Steve Pieczenik, for sure. Definitely. What else could I infer from this? Neptune, ninth house, travel, international, right? Neptune, again, kind of obtuse. Who is he? Who does he work for? Transnationalism, all that stuff, right? CFR, Chiron and Virgo. I could totally see that. In square with the sun, in square with Mars. I think this guy's got a really bad temper, by the way. Really, really bad temper. And he is definitely into authority. He's got that Sun-Mars conjunction. Sun-Saturn conjunction in Gemini. He's very into authority. And right now, he's back on the scene again. Look, he's back on Alex Jones again. He was off there for a while. When Alex was kind of in the gutter, he wasn't on there. He was doing his home brew videos, right? Somebody's trying to call me. Who is this? There we go. So this is a time for him, but he's also going to have some issues, especially by this time next year, where the South Node is on his sun. And one of the things that is happening is that there is a power grab right now going on in the United States. And I've talked about how these groups are really gangs. And he thinks that based on what he can do, what other people in his group, his intel, his psychological operations, the people that they're working with, that they can run the game and create this new version of America, which, according to Steve Pieczenik, has nothing to do with the Constitution. If I were him, I would not be overconfident, especially when I look at his chart. I would not be overconfident. So I'm showing you this because I believe right now what we're seeing, just in terms of what's going on out there on the streets, in these major cities, and happening in major cities for a reason. Also in the rural areas on the West Coast where we see these fires in California that are burning, it has to do with decentralization and moving people out of those regions and into the center of the country. He even said that. He even said it. Okay. And that's what people are doing. They're jumping off the ship. Because at some point, they will take control of those areas, or they will subcontract those areas out to third parties. Don't be surprised about that. If the subcontracting goes out to China or any other group who is willing to come in and essentially manage. Because what we're talking about now are transnationals and moving away from this idea of a country, a nation, and a republic into kind of a more agile version of how America or how the United States will be configured. Keep that in mind, okay? So it all depends on who they want to manage whatever's left in terms of, either the West Coast or New York or certain areas on the East Coast. All right? There we go. All right, Robert, seriously, the sound of your cell phone is rather twilight. I know. I wanted a different kind of I wanted a different kind of ringtone, let's put it that way. Let's see. What else do we have here? Anything else? Perfect timing. Alex is listening to Robert. I do think that Alex Jones has listened to me in the past, by the way. I do think so. I have said things and covered things, and they've shown up on Alex Jones's show. Trust me. Alex Jones has listened to me. He knows who I am. Okay. So once again, you fool me. So, okay, you guys, is that Israel Lessing Pachinik? I guess. I think Alex was MK'd to a certain degree. Well, we know a little bit about Alex Jones on a personal level. Father is intel. That is for damn sure. There are CIA connections coming in through the grandfather, through the father. The father is a dentist in Austin. If you want to know about David Jones, you just ask Joan S., because Joan S. worked for David Jones at one point, and she knew young Alex Jones, who used to run through the dental office, excitedly panting about the fact that he took 15 hits of LSD. So there you go. Does that qualify as MK? The other thing about Jones is that I believe that he is, obviously he's a Freemason. Never talks about Freemasonry. Never. And you don't get custody of your kids in California. Texas. The way that he's gotten custody with his kids. And even when Kelly Jones went up against him and won a second time, she won. She got some concessions. Well, guess what? Alex Jones went back in and ran the whole thing all over again and got his kids back. Right? You don't do that unless you're connected. That doesn't happen. Unless you got people on the inside. Okay? Trust me. I am not a Mason, and I have not had the same kind of sort of support. Let's put it that way. Okay. There you go. Rosicrucian. No, there was an image of Alex Jones on the internet one time in full Masonic regalia, which had since been scrubbed. Okay. There you go. There it is. Scrubbed. Today has done a very yeah. Thanks, Maury. As coming from you, that's really a compliment. I mean that. All right, I am exiting stage left today. I will be back tomorrow. So, Chad Stumpke. Chad Stumpke is going to be on the show on Friday. He's the guy that gets into like Stargates in Detroit and the amazing kinds of buildings across the U.S. He's got a new video out. Chad will be on the show. We'll be talking with him for an hour, and I'm trying to get Lark in Texas back on the show, which I think will make Squirrel very happy, and getting into more of the communitarian idea of where we're headed. His roots are John Birch Society. They are John Birch Society as well. That's true. But there was also a picture of him in full-on Masonic garb. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow putting the bits and pieces together. Event people, you'll get an email today. So here we go. Bye for now. Hit the like button, please. There'll be a donate button to subscribe. If you want to go to the event, you're going to have until Friday to work things out with me. You will need to stay in the area at a B&B or another hotel. I can point you to a very good hotel that is very affordable. You will still be able to attend all the events. Okay. But that window has closed for rooms at the hotel. If you really want to go, you have until Friday to reach out to me. And after that, that's it. We got our number. Okay. All right. Atlantia, love you. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.